Joining us now from Beirut, Lebanon, is NBC News' Middle East Bureau Chief Richard Engel. Richard, thanks for joining us. Let me ask you the obvious.
How are you?
I'm impressed by the report you filed today, and let me ask you the obvious question. After Danny Pearl, how did you get access to these guys, and why didn't they harm you?
Well, I think the easy answer is they were very proud of what they're doing. Al-Qaeda feels very strong right now. This was a cell in Jordan, and they want to show to the world that Al-Qaeda has changed, that there are now these small, self-sustaining, self-contained cells that are able to move in and out of Iraq. The initial idea, according to the Bush administration, was to gather all of the militants in Iraq, fight them there so they don't have to be fought in the U.S. These militants definitely wanted to say, we're no longer in Iraq, we're operating openly, and this is the new face of Al-Qaeda.
Operating openly in, among other places, Syria and Jordan, neither of which has a fundamentalist government. Are their governments worried about the presence of Islamic radicals like this within their borders?
Very much so. Jordan has already had several attacks against it. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the Jordanian former leader of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq movement, was behind those attacks. So he carried out attacks both in Iraq and then back at home. So many Arab countries are worried about this blowback effect, and that's exactly why Saudi Arabia is trying this somewhat experimental program. After the war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union, many mujahideen or Islamic fighters returned to countries like Saudi Arabia and carried out attacks. They want to make sure that a new generation of fighters doesn't come back from Iraq and do the same thing.
If you could sum up a couple of basic reasons that the guys you interviewed were drawn to Al-Qaeda, what would they be?
Iraq. It's all about Iraq. That is the main motivating factor. It's what they see on the internet. It's what they see on the television. Most of the recruits now are self-recruits. These are people who watch videos on their cell phones, on the internet, and they decide to join up with Al-Qaeda. They train themselves at home. There are jihad manuals openly available on the internet, and it's the Iraq is the big draw. Also, Palestine and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that is something that is emotionally very engaging for people, for angry young men here in the Middle East. But because it's so difficult to get into the West Bank and Gaza Strip because of tight Israeli security restrictions, it's much easier for them to fight in Iraq. So that's exactly what they're doing. It is definitely Iraq.
Well, how easy is it? Let's say you're a young Jordanian inflamed by what you see on satellite television or the internet, and you want to join the resistance in Iraq. How hard is it to do that?
Buy a ticket to Baghdad. It's not that difficult.
Just fly in and ask around?
Do not just fly in and ask around. It's not that difficult. Anyone from the Arab world who wants to go to Syria, because it's a pan-Arab state, is allowed without a visa to enter Syria. Some of the militants we spoke to said that Al-Qaeda specifically wants people that do not have criminal records, doctors, engineers, people who can move freely about not only the Arab world, but Europe and the United States. Iraq is a target, but all of them kept repeating over and over again that their main objective is Europe, particularly the UK and the United States. Iraq is the training ground, but the ultimate objective is well beyond Iraq's borders.
And finally, Richard, we see poll numbers in this country. You never know how accurate they are. Tell me your impression. How much support, popular support, does Al-Qaeda have in places like Jordan and Saudi Arabia, U.S. allies, fundamentally U.S. allies?
Most people do not believe in Al-Qaeda. They think it is a vicious, bloodthirsty terrorist organization, and that is across the board. But what people do have sympathy for is this idea that, well, maybe groups like Al-Qaeda, even though we hate them, are somewhat necessary as a fringe movement. There is a general impression, I think about 90% of Egyptians, according to opinion polls I've read, believe that America's foreign policy is fundamentally a war on Islam. And that impression is widespread across the region. So if you take that as a basic premise, that people in the Middle East fundamentally believe the Bush administration and the war on terror is a war on Islam, then there is unfortunately a fairly substantial group of people who are willing to take the next step, believing that there needs to be groups within the Middle East that should fight back against this perceived war against Islam, Tucker.
Really a terrific report. Thanks a lot, Richard. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.